Good morning, or good evening, or whatever it is, wherever you are, and or whatever time you're watching this video. I hope everyone is having a good week. It is almost the weekend, which is a good thing. Let's see. Everybody should be getting their stimulus checks, which is a good thing. Save it, or use it on essentials. Don't spend it on necessities, guys. I don't think I really have to be telling all this. Welcome to the office again. Day 2 of doing videos in the office, which I'm excited for. Let's see. What else do I need to tell you guys? I think that's it. Look forward to a special video tomorrow. I'm kind of working on something with a friend of mine. Gonna see if we can still follow protocol and, social distance. But probably come over here or whatever. We're gonna meet up and do a Bible study together. Don't know what we're gonna do yet. We just started talking about this morning, so. But I promise you it will be something very special. All right, so we're going to get into it. Hope everyone can hear me fine. Let me know down in the comments if you can't. So tonight we see the third answer Paul gives to the church. And it has to do with sound preaching. So, for those of you just now joining, which is also another thing, I don't know if y'all have paid attention to the members of the group, but I kind of do. That's kind of one thing that my eyes just go towards too. Whenever I get on the Facebook page, we're up to 40 plus members, so that's a good thing. When we started out, I was 12, and then 20 something, and then 30 something, and now we're 40 something. So, welcome to everybody, new and old. I'm glad you could join me. So to recap, those of you that are just joining us, and or are just now catching up. Okay, to recap, a letter was written from the Corinthians to Paul, telling him about how divided their church was becoming. Paul answers that letter, and we have it recorded as the book of 1 Corinthians. Paul offers them 11 answers to their division problem. The first answer was the cross. If the church would refocus on their purpose based upon the cross, the church would begin to come back together. Second answer was remembering that God chose those God chose were at one time simple and humble people. The Corinthians need to remember who they were. So that's a little recap of what we've been talking about. And I am going to open up my Bible to 1 Corinthians if I can find it. So the Corinthian church was deeply divided, and two of the issues dividing the church were a dispute over what kind of preacher should fill their pulpit, and which former minister had contributed the most to their church. This same problem exists today. I don't know of any church that agrees 100% what type of preaching people want coming out of the pulpit. Some want well-studied messages. Some want topical sermons. Some want entertaining messages. So on that, I was watching a video today by a gentleman by the name of Jonathan Rumi, who is who portrays Jesus in a TV series called The Cross, or the Chosen, not The Cross, The Chosen. He was talking about this earlier, and you know, people want someone who talks about God. Not necessarily. They want someone that talks about God and doesn't have a time restraint. A time restraint can be a church's worst enemy. You know, my videos, some of them are 30 minutes long, some of them are 20 minutes long. I think the live video we did on Easter Sunday was almost an hour long. Some of them are even 10 minutes long, guys. Time shouldn't be a factor. There are some preachers that they have a watch. They're looking at the watch. They think people only need to be in church for an hour. It shouldn't matter how long you're in church. If a preacher has something to say, then I don't care how long it takes for them to say it. Let them get it out. It may take 2 hours. It may take 8 hours. But just let them get it out. And some, so we're going to go back to what we're actually talking about now. Some want a preacher who preaches from the pulpit. Some want one that runs all over the sanctuary while he preaches. Some want only men preachers. Some don't mind women preachers. So I'm going to ask you this. What do you prefer? Do you prefer a man or a woman? Some want a preacher who preaches from a controlled stance. Others want one who bangs the pulpit and screams from the top of his voice. I don't really think that's necessary. But if I can't, if someone can't hear you, okay, you may want to scream. Not really. But that's just my personal opinion. Some will never be satisfied because this preacher will never be what our former preacher was. Okay. There it is. Sound preaching is not eloquence or human wisdom or philosophy. This is Paul's testimony. He used the words I and my 8 times in the first 5 verses. He stressed that the concern of preaching is not to be eloquence or human wisdom. First, eloquence. Remember, Paul is speaking about words, not so much about himself. He didn't try to sound superior when he preached. He wasn't trying to outdo any other preacher that they may have heard. It wasn't, and it isn't, a competition. Paul also stresses that sound preaching is not human wisdom or philosophy. The world is constantly seeking more and more wisdom, education, science, technology, and new novel ideas. The problem is that man seeks these things from the framework of the world. He forgets God entirely. Everything within the world is unfilling within itself. It passes away and it ceases to exist. This is why Paul didn't preach human philosophy or worldly wisdom. When Paul preached, he wasn't concerned with sounding like a philosopher or some deep thinker or a preacher with a new and novel idea or position. Sound preaching is simply declaring the testimony about God. The testimony is Jesus Christ and Him crucified. Preaching would not be considered an eloquent speech. God's preachers are to preach salvation to a lost world. The genuine preacher of God is to preach the testimony about God. The message of Paul was Jesus Christ. He saw the resurrected Jesus firsthand. He had a great testimony. He concentrated on the death of Jesus Christ. The reason is seen when we look at what Scripture says about the subject of Jesus' death. It is by the death of Jesus Christ that we are cleansed and freed from all sin. It is by the death of Jesus that we are justified, that we are delivered from death, that we are delivered from condemnation, that we are delivered from the judgment and the coming wrath, that we are delivered from his present evil age. It is by the death of Jesus that we are healed, that we are given all things. By his death that those without strength are saved, that the ungodly are saved, and sinners, along with the enemies of God, are saved. It is by his death that the great love of God is revealed to us. And it is by his death that we are freed from a self-centered life and live for Christ. By his death that the church of God was bought. By his death, by the death of Jesus Christ, that Jesus gained the right to be exalted as the Lord of the dead and the living. Sound preaching is proclaimed with the great sins of inadequacy. Let me explain that a little bit more. Why did Paul feel so inadequate? Well, there's a couple reasons. We're going to go over all of them. His personal appearance was apparently not impressive, at least not to the Corinthians. Paul says in 2 Corinthians chapter 10, verse 10, that he was unimpressive in person. He also states in Galatians 4:14 and also in chapter 6, verse 11, that he suffered some infirmity. Should that really matter? Let's get personal here. What would you think if I did a video like I did the other day in my living room in shorts, t-shirts, and flip-flops and do a Bible study? Some of you might say it's okay. Others may see the first 5 seconds of the video and close the browser. And not come back. Do you see why God is giving us this tonight or today or whatever day it is? Second one is Paul may have been a small-framed man with a great ability to teach, but not so much to preach. When Paul came to Corinth, he was sensing weakness in the ministry, a great personal inadequacy. He had faced former trouble in his ministry. In Philippi, he saw a promising beginning smashed by the religionists. A similar thing happened in Thessalonica and Berea. He had just come from Athens, and some said that that was a failure as well. Athens was very intellectual. I can't speak this morning. And philosophical, So Paul had attempted to meet them on their own philosophic grounds. He had reduced Christianity to philosophic terms. He tried to speak to them in the wisdom of the world using their own terms and quoting their own authorities. His philosophy approach failed in reaching people for Christ. So it seems that somewhere on the road, traveling between from Athens to Corinth, that Paul determined that forever after he would preach Christ and Christ alone in the simplest of words. So Paul says in verse 4, which I'll read, that sound preaching is not in persuasive words. It's a demonstration of the Spirit and power. Note the words message and preaching. He makes a distinction between sharing a message using daily speech or conversation and preaching. Paul's daily conversations focused upon Jesus Christ, just as his preachings did. He was determined not to know anything among people except Jesus Christ and him crucified. This tells me that we should be the same way. Our lives and conversation should focus upon Jesus Christ every day and all day long. Note the word persuasive. Paul's preaching was not based upon the enticing, persuasive arguments of man's wisdom and philosophy. Paul uses the word demonstration, meaning showing forth with evidence and proof. The idea is that the evidence is presented so strongly that the truth is clearly seen. The only way a person's witness and preaching can be proclaimed so strongly is through the Holy Spirit and His power. Verse 5. Sound preaching leads to faith. The wisdom of man can't save man. The friendship of man can't save man. No matter how holy and right you might think a person is, the reality is that person cannot save you. I'm going to say that one more time. No matter how holy and right you think a person is, the reality is that person cannot save you. A person's salvation cannot stand in the human knowledge and wisdom of man. So the minister of God must speak and preach under the influence and power of God's Spirit. Paul stresses this point of sound preaching because apparently the church was divided over who could preach the best. Who was the most philosophical, who was the most entertaining, etc., etc., etc. Paul says that anything short of the preaching as influenced by the Spirit of God is unacceptable. Guys, we're going to end this study at least, or this answer number 3 right here. I hope y'all enjoyed this video. I thoroughly enjoy doing these videos and seeing comments and getting feedback. Yeah, it's a lot of fun to get y'all's feedback from these things. Anyways, I hope everyone has a good rest of the week, and I'll see y'all later.